Hello everyone. Happy New Year. I hope you had a lovely festive season. I hope that so far 2024 is treating you well. I'm honestly off to a bit of a flying start on my reading challenge, not gonna lie. For 2024, it's going pretty great. But before we look ahead, we gotta finish wrapping up 2023. So this is my first video of 2024, but it's also kind of my last wrap up of 2023 because it's my December reading wrap up. Tea is so hot and it smells really good, but it's really hot. I had a really good reading month in December. I tend to find December tends to be a pretty good reading month because you've got that like week of nothing at the end of the year. You're like, I've got a bit of, a bit of excitement to finish off my goals for 2023. So I did have a really good reading month. It was a very 4-star heavy month. So lots of really good books, but only a couple that really stood out to me. Let's get straight into the books, and as always I'm going to be ranking them from my least favourite book of the month to my favourite book of the month. So we're starting off with my only 2-star read of December, which was Finding My Elf by David Valdez. I tend not to really go in for much sort of festive fiction. It's not really... I tend not to pick up like Christmassy books, but I thought this looked cute, and so I listened to the audiobook, and it was cute. It just got pretty like dull. So the main character, he is struggling at university. He's about to lose his scholarship, and rather than tell his dad that he's about to lose his scholarship, he enters a competition at the local mall. It's so weird to say that in a British accent. At the local shopping centre. And it's a competition, like a reality style competition for the elves. And there's a prize money, and yeah, that's the premise. The thing is, this competition got so complicated and so convoluted just to service the plot. Like, it was like he wanted all these things to happen, and so had to keep changing the competition to make it happen. And there was a romance, but it was, I don't know, something about the romance didn't really quite vibe with me. Like, it was cute, it was really sweet. Yeah, it just wasn't really anything to write home about, to be honest. So yes, this one was a letdown for me. It was a 2-star read. So then on to the 3-star books, and the next one was also not necessarily a letdown. I mean, it was, I gave it 3 stars. But not what I expected, and that is Rhubarb Lemonade by Oscar Kroon. And this book is such a good example of how the cover is so important to a book, because this cover is giving romance, it's giving like holiday kind of summer holiday romance, light-hearted, really sweet coming of age story. And that wasn't really what this book was, and I thought when I looked at the international covers, they were all much better at sort of portraying what this book was, which is that it was a sort of more literary story, and there was a romance, but it was a small part of the story. It was much more about family and growing up and grief and becoming an adult. That sort of, that summer, the kind of idea of a summer where you become an adult. That was the sort of vibe of the story. Really nicely written. Although because it's translated, it's hard to tell like how much of that is the writing and how much is the translation. So yeah, it was enjoyable. It was nothing really, it didn't really stand out to me particularly in any sort of aspects of it. But yeah, once I readjusted my expectations, I had a much more enjoyable reading experience. So having said that I don't usually read festive books, I read 2 this December, and the other one is The Haunting Season, which is a collection of ghost stories for winter nights. Now, ghost story collections, short story collections generally, are always a mixed bag, especially if they're different authors. There'll be some that you love and some that you really don't like, which was the case in this one. There were a couple that I was like, ooh, that, I didn't enjoy that. I'm not in a like, ooh, that was spooky way, in a nope way. So yeah, so a mixed bag. Some I really loved, some not so much. I think the difficulty with ghost short stories, whatever order those words go in, the difficulty with this as a premise is it's quite hard to have a satisfying conclusion to a ghost story, you know, because they often end with like, they're either open-ended or the ghost wins or something. You know, it's quite hard to write a good ending, and it needs time for a good ending, and in a short story that's not necessarily the case. So it did start to feel a little bit like a lot of unfinished stories that all kind of had that same like, and then they went on haunting ending. But I did enjoy it. There were some that were really, really good. And now for something completely different. Benny the Blue Whale by Andy Stanton versus ChatGPT. Now let's get this out of the way before we get any further into this book. Generative AI has no place in the creative arts. 100%. It cannot write books. It cannot produce artwork. It is not art. You know, like AI cannot produce art by definition. And that is sort of what this book is investigating, is what can an AI produce? What are its limitations? What are its pitfalls? And what does it tell us about our own storytelling and our own biases? So that's kind of what this book is about. So there is a ChatGPT element, because you can't write a book about AI without using AI. And so yeah, I was kind of on the fence about this, and then I saw that the audiobook, the ChatGPT sections were narrated by Nish Kumar, so I was like, yes. And it was basically a really long podcast about AI and what it's like using AI, and like I said, the kind of ups and downs of the process. There were lots of really interesting things explored, especially about storytelling. That was the kind of main focus, was how AI cannot understand storytelling and what makes a compelling story. The idea of bringing back a character that's been in the first chapter and then not been in it since, you know, that's bringing them back, that sort of thing. The struggles that Andy Stanton had when trying to get an AI bot to write a story. But also things like censorship and how the censorship of the programmers affected the story in unexpected ways, how certain biases that we have cropped up in the story. So sort of reflecting on all of those things. So yeah, lots of it was really, really interesting and very, very thought-provoking. There was just some glaring omissions. There were some things that cropped up that I really wanted to hear more about and to discuss, but it was just sort of glossed over. So that was a little downside to me. The main thing that kind of actually made me not enjoy it so much, the AI story itself was the most ridiculous, outrageous thing. And at the start I was like, this is pretty funny. But it got old pretty quickly. It got old very quickly. You know, I like to think I don't always have the sense of humour of a 13-year-old boy, which felt like where the sense of humour was with this book. So that got old pretty quickly. But there were some interesting things here. And I think it's a good sort of reflection on whether the use of AI, the use of generative AI. So yeah, that's Benny the Blue Whale. We are now into the 4-star books, and I have so many, we're going to whiz through them. So first of all is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I gave this 4 stars because I gave the first half 3 stars and the second half 5 stars. It felt like 2 different books, but you had to have the 3-star bit to get to the 5-star bit, because that's what made it make sense. And this is kind of about social media, sort of, yeah. It's a very all-encompassing idea of social media at the start, and then in the second half there is a family tragedy, a really difficult personal time, and it's sort of this kind of semi-influencer character and how she and her family deal with it and how it's responded to. To be honest, it was so weird. I'm still a bit baffled by it. It's a sort of weird where I'm like, is this genius and I'm missing something? Or is it just weird? That's where I'm at with this one. So I am glad I read it because I've been intrigued for a while. But yes, it was very weird. The next one is actually the last book I read of the entire year, and that is A Lady to Treasure by Marianne Ratcliffe. And this is a Sapphic Regency romance, 3 of my favourite words. And I just had a jolly old time. It was really, really fun. What I especially enjoyed about this book, so the main character, Louisa, she is from America. She's moved to England to kind of make her fortune, to make some more fortune. And then Sarah is the daughter of an aristocrat, and she is looking to boost the financial well-being of the estate. And so what I thought was really well done in this book, and it's one thing that I often find is a pitfall in queer historical fiction, is how to get a happy ending. And because these 2 characters were women who were looking to be financially independent, they were able to have a really classic happy ending, which I really loved. It gave them a lot more to their story than the romance. The romance was sort of incidental to their own individual arcs. It kind of came about naturally from their friendship, which I really liked. It was a very enjoyable read. So yes, a nice, there we go, a Sapphic Regency romance recommendation for anyone looking for one. I do have a physical copy of the next one. It's just somewhere in a pile over there, so we're just going to leave it there. And that is Beneath the Night by Stuart Clark. This was my non-fiction read for December. And so the tagline is, How the Stars Have Shaped the History of Humankind, or something along those lines. And it's about how across the history of Western civilization, we have looked to the stars to shape our understanding of the world, how the stars have influenced religion, the way we structure our lives, such as, months, the zodiac, things like that. So really interesting, and how it intersected with science as well. Lots of really fascinating stuff. I did not know a lot about the history of the zodiac and how important it was in Greek society, but also how it sort of resurfaced when the kind of space age came about. I don't personally believe in astrology at all, but I think it's fascinating to kind of, as an observer. So yeah, lots of really, really interesting things. The big letdown for me, and this is kind of where the tagline versus my summary differ, is so it did discuss European perspectives, modern American perspectives, and Middle Eastern, Northern Africa, so sort of ancient Egypt, Islamic perspectives, that sort of thing. And apart from that, the rest of the world did not get a look in. And I think if you are going to write a book and slap on the front that it's about the history of humanity and the skies, then it should be a global history. Very famously, a lot of countries use a lunar calendar. And that was barely mentioned. The Chinese zodiac was not mentioned at all. And that would have been fascinating to look at how there are 2 completely different zodiacs that are used by 2 different cultures. That would have been really fascinating to explore. There was not a single mention of South America in the entire book, and no mention of African countries apart from Egypt, basically. So there were some huge glaring omissions that just felt frustrating, because I wanted to explore those ideas. I wanted this book to look at humanity as a whole, and it was basically a history of Western civilization's relationship with the night sky, which was really interesting, but not what I was hoping for, and not what the book sold me, I think. So moving on up in the 4-star zone is Glitterland by Alexis Hall. Oh, this matches my mug. Look at that, matching colour schemes. I love Alexis Hall books. We all know this. I mention his books all the time. And Waiting for the Flood, which is the second in this series, is having its re-release next month. So before that came out, I caught up with this one. This was Alexis Hall's first ever published book, and it's been sort of, I think, edited slightly, spruced up slightly. It's got some extra bonus material in this edition, and I really, really enjoyed it. One of the things that really struck me, so this book is about, it's a romance between a middle-class, Oxbridge-educated writer and a model from Essex. So 2 very different backgrounds, 2 very different stereotypes of people, And it was the author's note at the start where Alexis Hall himself was like, these are all the themes that I enjoy writing about. And I was like, those are all the things I enjoy reading about. That's why I love your book so much. Hadn't really told that myself. And the ideas of exploring class and stereotypes and the way we relate to each other was done really well in this book. It was a really nice romance. But yeah, it explored lots of other ideas as well, including mental health and classism and all that sort of thing. So another very enjoyable Alexis Hall read. I can't wait to get to Waiting for the Flood. I've got an ARC from NetGalley, so I'm going to try to get to it this month. So next up is Our Darkest Hour by Gabriella E. Mari. Now, this book, it is about a group of paranormal investigators, paranormal YouTubers specifically, and it's sort of their personal lives alongside the sort of paranormal things that are going on and their adventures. And what I loved about this book, the real standout for me, is that their fandom were like an extra character in this book. We got little interludes of seeing the forums, of seeing how all the fans interact. There's the crazy shippers that everyone is like, guys, be quiet, shut up, they're real people, it's weird. There's the mods who are just trying their best. There's the people who are coming up with conspiracy theories. There's the people obsessed with the different people in the YouTube group. I loved it. I thought it was such a fun addition that just really set this book apart for me. I just loved that. It was so great. It was a really nice romance as well. A really good romance between two of the characters. Lots of queer themes. And yeah, I had a great time. The actual paranormal storyline was fairly forgettable, but the rest of it I loved. So yes, it was a very strong 4 stars for me, this one. The next one is Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. Now I listened to the audiobook for this one, and I loved the audiobook. And when I went to do my review and I was looking through some other people's reviews, a lot of them mentioned the lack of punctuation as the reason they didn't enjoy the book. And I was like, I'm so glad I listened to that audiobook, because one of my pet peeves is no speech marks. I've said it before, I'll say it again. No one is above speech marks. Whereas the audiobook, you can't tell. So I think I had a more enjoyable experience because of it. So that aside, Mrs. S it's not quite dark academia, but I would say it's dark academia adjacent. If you enjoy the setting of dark academia, you will enjoy this setting as well. Because it is set in a boarding school. It's just about the staff rather than the students. And so the main character, and none of the characters have names as well, apart from Mrs. S. So the main character, she is a young butch lesbian who has moved from Australia to England and works in this boarding school, and she starts an affair with the wife of the head teacher. And so you've got all these characters, none of them have names, but I sort of feel like they didn't need them. It gave it this kind of like, because it also didn't have a clear setting, like a clear time that it was set in. So it gave it this sort of otherworldly feel that I really enjoyed. It was a very intense book, a lot of like intense feelings, really beautifully written, just really enjoyable all around. But yeah, I'm very glad I listened to the audiobook and not read the actual book, because I probably would have DNF'd it due to the no speech marks. And then my top 4-star read, and I deliberated for so long about whether to make this 4 or 5 stars, but I kept it in 4, and I will explain why. It is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I can't believe I didn't read... Actually, no, I can believe I didn't read this when it came out, because I decided I didn't want to. So I mean, okay, I loved The Hunger Games. Who didn't? They're brilliant. I was like, I don't need a backstory on President Snow. I thought it was unnecessary. I was like, no, I don't need that in my life. And then the film came out, and I was seeing so much about the film, and it seemed really good. I was like, okay. And then I was at my parents' house for Christmas, and my sister was reading it, and she'd borrowed it from a friend, and she was like, hey, you know how you're a really fast reader? Do you want to borrow it from me borrowing it while we're here, and then I'll read it after? So I did, and I loved it, and it was great. One of the reasons I was reluctant to go into this book is I often find villain backstories, there's like two flavours, right? There's the, they're just tragically misunderstood and they're really a sympathetic character. And then there's the, everything is evil and they had this tragic thing happen to them and that's why they're evil. And what I loved about this is it did not go down either of those routes. You know, Snow was and is bad. Obviously, he's the villain. He has his moral failings. He feels like, well, he knows he isn't doing the right thing quite a lot. He was very morally grey, but we really got a good insight into why he makes the decisions he does, into his background, and also the way that the background of Panem was done was just brilliant. I really liked how we started to see some of the familiar elements of the Hunger Games coming in, like we got that sort of in-progress snapshot, without falling into the temptation of, and here's where everything came from. I thought it was a really nice balance in that regard. The reason it didn't get 5 stars for me is that the last section just really dragged. I really struggled. It felt like a whole other book that was just sort of tacked onto the end. And interestingly, when I watched the film the week later, then I felt the opposite. I wanted a whole other film for the final section. I felt it would have made a good 2-part film. So yeah, I'm still on the fence about how I feel about the last section. Yeah, I think it was just too long and too dragged out. And yeah, I got to the last bit, I was like, I'm not really invested in this anymore. But obviously you need to get everyone, for a prequel, you need to get everyone to that place and kind of finish that character arc, or set him on the character arc that will get you to the Hunger Games. So yeah, brilliant book. Brilliant book. Just a little too dragged out at the end. We made it to the 5-star zone, and there are only 2 books in the 5-star zone. The first one is The Haunting Scent of Poppies by Victoria Williamson. And again, I have a physical copy. I do not know where it's gone. This is a short story set in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. It's a ghost story, and it follows a con artist, a bit of a con man, who is stealing a book that there is more to this book than meets the eye. And yeah, I mean, it's very short. I don't want to give too much away about the plot. What I really enjoyed about this book, I mean, it was so spooky, so atmospheric, and it was a complete unreliable narrator, because you've got this ghost story, but also he's recovering from the First World War. He's got shell shock, which we now call PTSD, you know? So that just gave it that sort of darker twist, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was really well done. So yeah, if you're looking for like a short little ghost story to get you in a wintry mood, it's one to go for. And finally, we have made it to my best book of December 2023, which was also in my best books of the year, and that is Small Joys by Elvin James Mensah. I loved this book so much. It was beautifully written. It was so tender. It was so poignant. It had all the different sort of shades of emotion. It had tragedy, it had joy, small joys, and it was just beautiful. It was lovely. It wasn't a queer romance, but it was about queer identity and friendship, and it was just so good. It was so good. I've already waxed lyrical about it in my best books of 2023 video, so I won't say too much more here, but it was really great. I loved it, and it was fantastic. A great way, because I finished that maybe halfway through December, towards the end of the year. Great way to round off the year. So there we go. There are all the books I read in December last year. Let me know what you read in December, and if you've read any of the books that I have, what did you think? Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for some more videos from me, and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.